To another topic now. Today you go back to Parliament. It is the third session of the 12th Parliament, and there are several things that you'll be doing, including what's on page 5 of the Daily Nation, that MPs to vote on gender rule bill next week. And you recall that sometimes last year, before you took recess, there was an attempt to have to have the bill passed into law. There was a lot of contestation from several members who felt that it wasn't quite the right thing to do, because it was suggesting that after an election, then the gender that is marginalized, in quotes, should have an opportunity to have members of that gender nominated to respect the 2/3 gender rule. So as you go back, has anything changed? Do you expect that finally in the next few weeks we'll have a law that will ensure that Parliament is constitutional at the next election?
First, let me go on record saying that I supported the gender bill, and I think my party leader, and I thank him for coming to Parliament together with Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka. It's a bill which really the Constitution is very clear about. It says it ought to have been passed within the last Parliament. It wasn't. I think this was a third attempt. I think there was another Duale bill which suffered the same fate. I am not sure that the bill in its current form will pass unless the two sides are whipped, and whipped with a distinct impression that this is our position as the government. We want you to pass this bill, and there is no room here for dissent. This is a party position. Unless that happens, and I've interacted with a lot of my colleagues, there are people with lots of questions. And either that bill answers that questions, or parliamentary group meetings on both sides are called in order to address these issues. There are people, for example, who felt that, you know, the whole idea of nominations being made are made in a skewed manner, where they feel that party or party leaders benefit or reward their own people. But my own problem with the bill, my support to it notwithstanding, is the fact that the bill seems to put a sunset date of 30 years. The question is, after 30 years, what happens? Because the section of the law that we are amending, of the Constitution, does not deal with the article. The article in itself that says no more than 2/3 of the gender shall be from one side. So after 30 years, we will be back to that law. If you look at that bill, it does not seek to say that after the expiry of the sunset years, this law itself, section 83, or this section, article 81, will stand repealed. So after the expiry of that window, we are back to another agitation. But maybe the hope is that
society would have been sensitized enough to actually decide to vote for either gender in equal proportion.
Then you will still need to come back to that article and say, let's repeal it if society gets there.
Okay.
So I think that's the elephant in the house, and perhaps maybe the leader of majority needed to relook that law and possibly withdraw it. The other option, and which I think would have been the better way to approach this thing, is to take this thing to the referendum. I think the referendum would have been the best way to sort out how do we deal with the question of the 2/3 gender rule. Yeah.
What's your take on this?
My honest observation is that just like my brother here, I also was supporting this bill. But on the floor of the House, I can tell you it will not pass.
It will not pass.
It will not pass. When you talk to colleagues and our brothers in the House, they say, according to them, whether they're feeling vulnerable, whether they feel that if you increase the number of the women representative to come to the House, chances are that there are certain bills which they may railroad. Whether that is a legitimate concern or not, there hasn't been enough education in the House. Members are extremely sensitive about this matter. They are either cultural, critical, sometimes even you hear some brothers of ours in the House bringing in religious issues. My honest observation is this bill will not pass. It will not muster 2/3.
So what do we need to do? Because there's a threat that someone can go to court and declare
my feeling is this bill cannot be brought to the House a week after recess. This bill should have been brought most probably a month after recess, so that you give members time. You give the women representatives time to engage and start lobbying male colleagues, to have all the political parties, because all the parties were supporting this bill, so that then you can have the whipping taking place, so that people can actually be talked to, so that people can see the sense why we need to introduce this bill and make sure we pass it.
You talk of a very important point there, that you're saying that the women member of parliament would need to persuade their male counterparts.
Yes.
And the conversation in this town, in this country, has been that it's not a bill for women, it's a bill for equality of gender at elections.
But it's an affirmative action bill.
True, because at the moment it's the women gender that is marginalized in quotes.
Yes.
But do you think the reason why this is failing, is it because of what some female leaders have accused of male chauvinism? Is it a perception thing? Or what are the actual issues that the male members of parliament have?
I will tell you, there is a legitimate worry, whether properly placed or not. There is a legitimate worry with the male members of parliament that if you look at the history on what has happened, for example, I'll give you a scenario. There are about 15 members of parliament who happen to be ladies, who in the last parliament were nominees. And these ladies have come up after their first term being nominated. They actually then went back to the ground and got elected. So you have male members of the House saying, if these women were able to come into parliament, and that is the period when they were nominated, and then they have actually gone back and they have been elected, like any person would be elected. And it's not that they were elected as members of the women reps from their counties. No, some of them have actually been elected. Exactly, like in, I think it's Samburu Central, one of the seats, the lady, I forget her name, forgive me. She actually initially, previously was, not Lesuda, there's somebody else. There's a lady who's a very, very critical name. She's in the budget committee. Sorry, I forget her name. She was nominated initially in the last parliament, but I think she was nominated 2007 and came in and lasted until 2013. Then after that, she actually came and won the seat.
Yeah, and Millie Odhiambo the same thing.
And Millie Odhiambo the same thing. And Lesuda the same thing. And so many of the male colleagues in parliament are saying, do we really need this affirmative action to make it possible for the women to get these positions? And given the number, and you see you have this public outcry out there that we need to reduce even the number of members of parliament, we need to reduce the positions. And some of the colleagues in the House are saying, why, like my colleague Oluoch said, why don't we take this thing to the referendum? If we are going to have a referendum, why don't we put it there and actually say, do you want to have nominees who are going to come in these numbers, or do you want us to select a certain number which then would have been compressed and there'll be fewer, but they will be playing a role of basically raising the disparities which have existed or reducing the disparities which have existed. There's
another way of also looking at this. First, the whole idea that we pigeonhole this like a women thing, I'd like us to disabuse ourselves of that, because really the 2/3 issue is about compliance with the Constitution. It's something we put in our law. We passed all other laws except the gender bill, and of course the PAC bill, which we've been battered about. So really it's about non-compliance or compliance. We need to sort that out. It has really nothing to do with this is about women. If at the moment, historically, women end up being the beneficiaries, that's just something coincidental, but it's about compliance with the Constitution. But there's something else we need to put into this. When you read the Constitution, it's always good to read the Constitution together, so that the articles, one with the other, so that really there's a seamless interpretation of the Constitution itself. Right. So when you read at Article 100 of the Constitution, the text of this article states that efforts will be made to ensure that there is gender parity or two-thirds rule is complied with, both in elective and appointive positions. So for what reason have we focused too much on the elective part, which is Parliament? There is a whole body of appointments, start with the Cabinet. We must ask ourselves, has the two-thirds issue been complied with in Cabinet? There is parastatal. There are heads of divisions and directorates in government. There were appointments recently made by the president. Right. There's a whole lot of things we can do to achieve the two-thirds gender. It is not about Parliament itself. So this preoccupation that two-thirds is about Parliament, it's a misnomer. When you read those two articles of the Constitution, you will see that there are a lot other ways that we can achieve gender parity. And it's time we started asking questions about the executive and the issue of the two-thirds gender.
All right. Wish you well in the debate and eventually the vote. Finally, the story on page 9 of the Daily Nation, CS blames fertilizer hitch on Treasury. The Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, Mwangi Kiunjuru, was before Parliament yesterday, a parliamentary committee, and he was saying that the reason why it's become difficult to procure fertilizer already is because the National Treasury has not released the money. But that's not what I want us to discuss in brief. But specifically the cash situation in government, because we got a report of the Control of Budget a few weeks ago detailing how counties were spending money in the first quarter of the financial year. That was between July and September 2018. And it appeared that exchequer releases were only going for recurrent expenditure. There was nothing that was being sent for development vote. And when we asked the questions, we were told that the IFMIS portal that should release money for development had not been activated. Now we see a cabinet secretary accusing his colleague, Henry Rotich, that the money has not been uploaded into the IFMIS. I mean, as legislators, as you return to work today, are there any interventions that you think can help resolve this situation that I want to call crisis in the financing of government operations?
Thank you. My brother, I'll tell you, first of all, this is a bad policy. The policy of saying that you are actually going to take government money, give it to a private farmer who is growing corn or maize in his farm, and subsidize him through or her through the purchase of fertilizers is the last policy any government should adopt. For the simple reason, this policy will be abused. Because the truth and the reality is, to me, what the government needs to do, and if you went to economics class 101, a lecturer will tell you, you can either subsidize at the source, or you can subsidize when you're buying. Are we together? And to me, what the government needs to do is very simple. Tell everybody to go and grow their maize, grow it whichever way you want, bring it. By the time the market price is going to be 2,500, we'll give you 3,500. You see what I'm saying? But when you are saying, first of all, the way the fertilizer has been provided for is unfair. In fact, I'm shocked somebody hasn't gone to court. Because, let me give you an example. Why are you giving subsidized fertilizer to farmers in Trans Nzoia, where I come from, and farmers in Kericho, all right, which is part of the Rift Valley, and you're not giving farmers in Kisii and Migori and Homa Bay who grow maize that same fertilizer?
Is that correct? Are you saying that farmers in other parts of the country cannot access this subsidized
Absolutely.
fertilizer?
They don't get this fertilizer. I mean, if you look at the stories, if you checked, all right, this fertilizer is actually only being given to certain areas. Number two, why are you giving fertilizer to the maize growing areas and you are not giving to the sugarcane growing areas? Why are you not giving fertilizer? Why are you not giving fertilizer to the areas where tea is being
this
grown?
policy has been ongoing for a couple of years, and the wisdom or lack of that informed it is because the country needed to be food secure.
Absolutely
and
wrong policy.
Some of the staple foods in this country, where you would talk about maize.
Yes.
But why haven't you been in a position to voice out your opinion about this through?
It is, number one, it's because nobody has ever asked me about my opinion. But at the same time, it is because we are beginning to understand and look at this policy. It is a bad policy. It is a policy whereby you are actually taking government money and you're giving it to a farmer, and you don't know what his output, his production is going to be. So the best way you actually subsidize a product is ask every farmer to grow his maize, but create a system when you are going to buy this fertilizer, when you are going to buy the product under National Cereals and Produce Board, even though it has failed. If National Cereals and Produce Board was actually buying maize, when somebody now delivers the 200 bags of maize, the government will say, the money which we would have paid you because of the fertilizer, we are now going to compensate you. So your bag of maize, instead of it costing 2,500, which we buy as cereals, we'll actually pay you 4,000 bob.
Okay. Mheshimiwa, on the question about the availability of resources at different government departments and even counties, why do we have a budget of 3 trillion shillings, but the money to finance it is not available in the IFMI system?
That's the elephant in the house, actually. And if you can see the opening paragraph of this, is that Mwangi Kinjuri is laying the blame on Treasury. And I think the truth of the matter here is that there is a cash crunch in the country. There's a cash crisis. And I think CS Rotich and probably the Commissioner General of KRA should be telling us what's happening about collection, because the budget that they presented to us in Parliament was based on expectations and estimates that they made about what government would be collecting. Right. This is how they say they're going to plug in this budget. If this is not happening, then all these things about IFMIs and other things not being uploaded, these are a lot of English. I think it's a lot of English that we're being played around with. They should come back to Parliament and tell us, look, the projections we gave you about what we were going to collect in this first quarter or second quarter, it has not happened. This is how we want to review it. This is how we want to plug the difference, or try to get to cast the net wide in terms of collection. And the reason I'm saying that is this. We have been saying we will pay by presidential directive the sugar farmers, and I agree with my colleague here. The sugar farmers were supposed to have been paid almost 6 weeks ago. And the story is about we are still doing audit, we are still doing this, the money is loaded in IFMIs. To date, I mean, the sugar farmers in the sugar belt, the kids cannot go to school, the term is going to end, yet we have not paid the sugar farmers. So when we bring the debate now about maize farmers, then we ask ourselves the question, why is there differential treatment on the issue of subsidies? Why is it more important, and I don't want to begrudge the sugar farmers, whatever payment they are being made in government, but is there a policy on subsidy that is consistent in government? Yeah? Is there a policy that when we are going to pay, it applies to the farmers, it applies to the sugar people, we are going to do the same for coffee people? It shouldn't be arbitrary. What's the government policy on this? Okay. That's the number one question. Number two is a question he has raised about sustainability. If people are going to do maize, they should do maize because they think it is profitable. It should not be that it is the way of life, it is the routine thing that you're going to plant maize, but irrespective of the market forces or whether they will make profit or not, you're going to get some government subsidy. That's very bad economics. I'm not an economic student, but I think it's very poor economics, very poor planning. So I think the question then that the government should be answering here, one is about policy and the other one is about equity. If you're going to pay the farmers of maize, do the same for sugar people. And then the last question is, should this be government business? Yeah? Agriculture is a devolved function. We need to draw the boundaries. At what point does it become a core business of government to be doing these subsidies? Countrywide, I mean, worldwide, we know agriculture subsidies are practiced, but they don't have a constitution like ours that says that agriculture is a devolved function. So what remains in central government is the question of policy.
For example, look at how much money the government has pumped into Galana Kulalu. Not less than 42 billion shillings for the last 5 years. Nothing has come out of it. What is the government doing in planting maize? Who told you government can plant maize?